Thank you guys for inviting me and for being here. I have a story to tell about Reverend Arnold. Um, Back in the day, Santa Maria de la Paz used to have a pastor switch, and we would get someone from St. Bede's, and we would get Reverend Talitha to come over and give a sermon like once or twice a year. I don't even remember how much it was. And my husband and I and our young son went there, and David basically fell asleep every Sunday. And then she would preach, and he would wake up and he would say, "Why can't it be like this every week?" So he loved her sermons. So even if they were, I don't think they were long, but he really did. And now that we've raised our child, I can't get anyone to go to church with me. So there you go. Anyway, so in the email from Reverend Talitha, she asked me to come up with 3 challenges for Santa Fe in the next, decades ahead. And I think there's really obvious ones that we all know, like growth, sprawl, water, housing. And how we deal with those not only determines what kind of city we have, it determines what kind of people we are. Because if you say, "I love affordable housing, but this is the wrong place," and it's always the wrong place, then you probably don't really love affordable housing. And it's hard because, we all want our properties to be kept safe, to be nice. I live within half a mile of the homeless shelter on Cerrillos. And I know what has changed in my neighborhood over the years because of it. And what I always think about is, even if there's a guy living in my arroyo who occasionally leaves me jars of something funny looking in the yard, I still get to go to sleep in a bed and have hot running water and an actual bathroom. And he's still sleeping in the arroyo. So I think the first challenge for me as a citizen is, how do we build housing that young families can afford, that, like a public interest doctor can afford, because that's how expensive we are now, and that will keep our city vibrant without completely changing us to the point that it's not Santa Fe anymore. And that's going to be really hard. And so as you think about that, you think about infill. Empire builders on Cerrillos Road, they want to replace it with a 4-story apartment building. Is that too high? Will it kill the traffic? I don't know. We'll have to do studies and look at it. But is that better than a completely abandoned warehouse that is unusable? In my neighborhood, across from Santa Fe High School, they wanted to build apartments that they could have rented to teachers. This is like 10 or 12 years ago. And the neighbors killed it completely. We didn't even get to the point where the paper would have written about it. It died early. And so instead of apartments or townhouses, whatever they were going to build, we have manufactured houses that don't have actual roads and aren't really platted properly. And I can't see that's better than what we could have had if people hadn't gotten all hot and bothered. So housing, I think, is going to be the big debate, the big discussion, and how we deal with it is going to determine if anyone under 50 lives in Santa Fe. Unless they're like my son and just stays at the house. Because he says, "I can afford this house because someday you guys are going to leave." And I keep thinking, does he mean like we're going to be dead? But so the housing, I think, is the first thing. The second thing I started thinking about was just climate resiliency. The big things that are going to happen in the world, like all the carbon emissions, all that kind of stuff. There's not necessarily, what Santa Fe does isn't going to save the planet, probably. What I do if I walk to work isn't going to save the planet. But collective actions, of course, add up. And then there's governmental actions. But then there's the reality that we live in a town that's hotter than it used to be. When we came back to Santa Fe and bought our house in 2001, we were laughing because it had central air conditioning. Like, who needs central air conditioning in Santa Fe? I'm from Las Vegas, New Mexico. I don't think I knew that air conditioning existed when I was a little girl. We didn't have it. And now, of course, we use our air conditioning. So I think I would like to see a city government, a county government, a state government that looks at climate resiliency in a number of ways. So they're doing a lot like, getting natural gas buses, those kinds of things. But are we building good bike lanes so that we can maybe move 5 to 10% of our transportation from cars? Pedestrian walking, all of the things that would make us a multimodal city we've talked a lot about, but I'm not sure we're making the progress we need to make. I mean, simple things like if you want to catch the bus, and I'm not a spring chicken, so I catch the bus in the summers because it's safe to walk home at night. Well, it's really hot and there's no shade. I would like my bus stop to have shade, and most of the bus stops do not have shade. Do we plant enough trees? We have a canopy project in the city. I think Carol Merriworth has pushed that. So that's something, if you're an active citizen, to check on. Is that working? Are we going to require new construction to build water catchment systems? Are we going to offer tax rebates or, maybe funds for low-income people to refurbish their houses to have water catchment systems? Do we have cisterns in parks? Do we have a plan to convert asphalt, to some of it to housing perhaps, and others of it to permeable parking lots? If you go to the Los Alamos National Bank, they have a permeable parking lot so that the water goes into the ground. Well, why are all the other parking lots still the same? And I know the owner of the New Mexican, my boss, has tried a couple of times to get the city to let her do a permeable parking lot when we remodeled the New Mexican, and for some reason that wasn't historic. And so I'm like, wait, we used to have dirt and mud. So that's those are the kinds of things. And we have a climate action plan that's really long, and I've read it before, but I really would like to see like a web page where you have goals, and here's what we're doing this year, this next year. How do you reduce urban heat islands? And how do you provide money for individuals? Like during the pandemic, we started growing things in our backyard because, again, my son won't leave the house, so he decided he was going to become an urban farmer. So I now have 15 chickens and a rooster that was supposed to be a girl but was not. And we were growing squashes and tomatoes and all sorts of vegetables, and it was too hot, so we covered them. And we found out that if you have shade cloths everywhere, your house is much cooler. So do we need to make that permanent? Do other people need to have money for awnings? So there's just so many things. Like we have 10 or 15 years before the temperature goes up a lot more. What are we doing as a city, as collective people and as individuals to get ready for that? So those are some, kind of, so that's my second one. So housing, climate resiliency. And the third one, I sort of have two. And one is more abstract in that I think that we need to be a more united city. And it would be nice if elected officials, important people in town, regular people in town, just do more things to bring us together in a way where we're not fighting about everything. And I think that's something obviously we need as a country. And I think about, the Surgeon General has said that we have a loneliness epidemic. So here you guys are together, you see each other on Sundays, and maybe you have committees and you work together. So you're in a community and you're collectively doing good things. So you're probably not going home depressed because you're lonely necessarily. Maybe you are, but maybe not. And I think we need more of those things. Like, when they had the Elks Club or, the Rebeccas, we've just separated too much, and somehow we have to start getting back. And the city's actually done some interesting things. Like they used to, maybe they're still doing it this year, but they have walks every so often, and you basically walk with strangers and you talk, and maybe you make friends, maybe you don't, but at least that hour or two of the week you're hanging out with somebody. If you're over 55, and I keep meaning to go sign up so I can get free lunch, but you can go to Mary Esther Gonzalez and get lunch every day. So if you're still driving at 60 and you're retired and you want to meet people outside of your social circle, you can go to a senior center and they'll feed you, and maybe you'll make a friend, and they teach computers and all sorts of things there. So I think just more activities that bring us together and help us find commonalities. But my other third one, I was thinking more about, this is like really practical structure of city government. If you've noticed reading the letters to the editor and reading Joe Sheps's, paid for ads, I wish they were full page. people aren't happy with the state of the city necessarily. At least that's what the loud people are saying. Maybe everyone else is happy and they just don't write letters. You know, you don't know. But city government we have a charter form of government in Santa Fe, which we voted as voters to have a strong mayor, the powers that they have to get a full-time salary, to do the things that the strong mayor can do. So if that's something that you don't see working, whether it's the personality of the person or whether it's the structure of government, I really think that we should look before the next time we just had a charter review and they didn't really do a lot. But I think the structure of city government is something that should be looked at to see if there's a better way to run the city that's more responsive to citizens, that probably gives less power to one person, and that enables the city council to act more aggressively because they probably they're closer to the people. I mean, that's the whole point of the council. So that's I think, a thing that would be worth, like, good government groups could talk about and kind of see, is this how we want to do it? So those are my things that I've thought about as challenges. And the main thing at the paper is that Robin Martin, who is from Nambe, the owner of the paper, she inherited it from her dad, Mr. McKinney, has always said is that she wants our editorial pages to be a place where the community can have a conversation. You know, they're not, you know, obviously we have the unwritten, the unsigned editorial. Some people might say it's unwritten. I got letters and they say, you're an idiot for writing. It's really funny. But we have the unsigned editorial, that's the opinion of the paper. Every one of those is read by Robin. It's designed to not be the omnipotent. It's not supposed to be like we know everything and we know best. It's really designed to offer some suggestions and ideas so that maybe if you do these things, we won't have the same problems. And then the letters are basically what you guys want to say, what you want to write about. The my views are what you guys want to say, what you guys want to write about. So there's a real space in our paper to talk about what's wrong and to offer solutions, because she really wants it to be solutions-based. So I think when we think about all the challenges we faced, you have to start thinking about what are our solutions, whether individually, as collective groups in town, and as a government. And the beauty is that as of today, until whatever happens with all the elections and everything else, we still have the ability as citizens to organize and enact change. So that is my short speech, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to hear them, and I thank you guys. Yes, sir.
This is really unrelated. Thank you so much, though. A great overview. I wonder if you would comment on the Julian Assange case. It was just resolved because he pleaded guilty to the crime of publishing government secrets. A lot of people in the news business are concerned, and they say, wait, news media, that should be our job to publish government secrets, and it shouldn't be a crime. Do you have a thought about that?
Inez, can you sort of paraphrase the question, because we're recording this?
All right, so I was asked to comment on Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks person who just pleaded guilty and is going to be let go back home for time served. And his crime is that he published government secrets, which, as a journalist, sometimes that's what you do. You know, we all know about the Pentagon Papers, and what is my reaction? And I have a lot of different reactions in that I'm sort of the mind that he wasn't an independent actor, and I really worry about where his funding came from and what his initiative, you know, why did he do all of this? So that was one reaction. Another reaction is that, yes, we should publish secrets if we feel it's important for the public to know, because obviously the government keeps too many things secret. I mean, in Santa Fe, sometimes you couldn't even find out what the budget was if you were a city councilor, much less the public. But as just a regular person, I hope if I ever got a document that might name spies, let's say, that could then get killed, or troop movements that could then cost American lives, I don't know that even if I'm the best journalist in the world, am I the person who gets to decide that? And that's what always made me nervous about him, is some of the decisions he made probably cost lives. And maybe you know, did the Pentagon Papers cost lives? I don't remember that. But maybe he needed to do that to tell the whole truth. Did he need to leak Hillary Clinton's emails in that way that kind of upset the election and got Putin's candidate elected? You know, it's so complicated. But no, it shouldn't be a crime to release government secrets if the government is withholding them in a way that is bad for the public. The question is, how do I, you know, Inez at the New Mexican know what's better? And we're gonna have to come to that. Sometimes it's better. And I'll end with what my mom always told me when I became a journalist. She said, if you ever promise someone confidentiality, you know that you will have to go to jail if they try to get you to tell it. Because this is right after Watergate, so we thought about these things. And I was like, well, I don't want to go to jail. And she said, then you don't promise anyone confidentiality. So I have a couple of times, and luckily it wasn't of the sort that would lead to me going to jail. But I always keep her voice in my head. So if I'm going to act, I have to make sure that like if I publish government secrets because let's say I get something about Los Alamos that people need to know, there might be consequences for that, and I will have to take them. And sometimes the consequences aren't right or fair either. As for him, his case is so complicated, and you know, I don't think Chelsea Manning should have gone to jail as long as, you know, just everything was a mess. So is that I don't know if that answers your question.
No, thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned something about getting some good government people in to discuss the charter. Who would those people be that would know about reforming a charter, and how would they advise the current government?
Okay, that's a good question. Charter Commission, past Charter Commission members, which you can find looking at the website. Carol Romero-Worth was on the first one. But I think like Meredith Macon, the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, those kinds of people, maybe a good political science professor who deals with municipal governments. Because we have a charter, we can change our government to suit ourselves in a way that, let's say, a non-home rule city in New Mexico can. So those are some of the people I would ask, because if you want to, the question is, you get a mayor, let's say, I don't know, Joe Smith runs for mayor, and he has no experience managing 1,000 employees. He doesn't know anything about how public works departments or asphalt works, but he's getting paid, you know, over $100,000 a year to run the whole city. So I just think there's lots of questions about how that works that we need to answer more fully, and before the election. So that's one I would really work on, because that's something. I always joke that you can't fix world peace, but we can all pick up our own trash and we wouldn't have a dirty city. You know, we can make the government more responsive and with less power in one person's hands if we want to, and we think that's a good idea. It might be that you look at it and think it's great, and that it's not the structure, it's the people, and it could be. So, yes, sir. Did you have a question? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I'm aware of some cities having a manager rather than a mayor. And is that person is not a political position? They're screened and chosen.
That's right.
Because
Well, in Santa Fe, we're lucky we have a manager and a mayor. We have both. And they chose the current city manager without a nationwide search. So yes, they should be screened. They should have almost public interviews, all of those kinds of things. And before we went to the strong mayor, we had a part-time mayor. And he was a little more ceremonial, but still he was the guy in charge, or she was the guy in charge. And I can't remember if the council, now the mayor picks the city manager and the council approves. But I think before they might have all voted. And I mean, it's as simple as we have a 4-4 city council. And you have a mayor who gets to vote, as well as present legislation, as well as pick the city manager, which the council could fire. I mean, the council doesn't have to accept all the appointments. They can always say, okay, this isn't working, we're going to move on. And that kind of stuff actually might start happening. I'm really going to be curious to see, in terms of city council politics, if there's going to be more pushback. Because if you're the mayor and you have four people on your side, 5-4 on the big things. Most things are unanimous, but there's some really big things that you're not going to be unanimous. You know, you pick the city attorney, the council approves it, that city attorney gets legislation from Council Z who no one likes, and their legislation just sits and sits and sits and never gets before the body. So there's all these things that can go on to push forward the things you want as mayor or as the power faction, whichever that is, and stop the things that other people want. So it's just kind of fun to watch. Yes, sir.
I have to admit my ignorance of city council, of city government styles in the U.S. But I'm curious, on the international scene, we see parliamentary systems that, in my opinion, are much more representative than what we have even in the United States. Is there such a similar type of city government in the United States that's more parliamentary and more representative of all the voices?
That's a good question. Parliaments, to me, in the United States, I think of them more legislatively in this, because that's how they, like in Europe, you know, France is voting and either everyone will win or lose depending on how they go. What they used to do, at least in New Mexico, is they would run slates. So you would have people maybe running on the freedom slate. And like in Las Vegas, when I was a little girl, the town, I don't know if you guys know much about Las Vegas, in that it has East Las Vegas and West Las Vegas. Until 1970, those were two separate towns. And in the late 60s, a group of individuals, and I don't know if they called themselves the Progress Slate or what it was, I can't remember the name, but my mom was part of that whole movement to unite the towns, have one city government, quit paying a bunch of adults for lots of money to have two city governments. And they won, and they had a big party on Bridge Street in 1970. And the people who got that passed and approved ran on slates in East and West. So that's sort of the closest thing that I can think of to a parliamentary, is that you say all four of us agree that we need to fire the police chief. And that's not about this town, that's just in general. So you run four people who want to fire the police chief, and they take over, they fire the police chief. What I've seen is, so you have a council manager form of government where the council, where the city manager is more important and the mayor's more a figurehead. You can have a strong mayor, but a lot of the strong mayors, you don't have a city manager. Like Albuquerque has a strong mayor, and they call him an administrator. So I don't know how different that is. So it just depends, and you figure out, who do you want to have the appointive powers? Who do you want to be able to fire? You know, on one hand, having the mayor be your boss means you have one boss. If the council is your boss, then you have, 8 bosses. So there's always pluses and minuses on both sides. And from the paper standpoint, one of the things we've written about a lot, if you guys read Mylon Simonich, that's one of his points, is there are a lot of salaries at the top. So if you have a mayor, a city manager, an assistant city manager, which we've had sometimes and sometimes not, and then all of these department heads, they're all making, over $100,000 a year. Meanwhile, we don't have people, and of course it's because supposedly nobody applies, but we don't have enough people to work in the parks or to be a lifeguard. So it's a complicated, it's way over, it's complicated. Yes, ma'am.
What role do you see churches having in the life of the city?
Oh, that's a great question. I think churches are our chance to show the world that Christians don't have to be jerks, for one thing. And obviously we have synagogues and Muslims and other religions as well, but for me I always hate when we say practicing Catholic, because it's like we have to keep practicing. But I'm a cradle Catholic, born and raised, still go to Mass, despite the many political differences and worries I have about the church and the increasing right-wing tilt of weird American bishops, and the fact that we don't even have female pastors and all of the things that are annoying about the Catholic Church that I love, despite, because I want the Eucharist when I go to, and I like the way we do it. But aside from that, churches led the way when it came to dealing with homelessness.
when we had 11 people freeze to death in Santa Fe, the city government wasn't setting up temporary shelters in the community centers or and the school district wasn't doing it in gyms. It was churches that opened their doors and said, come in, come in. So I think churches do that. Churches have fought for immigrant rights in this town in a way that I think is just incredible. I remember my first time around at the New Mexican was in the 80s, and the Universalist Unitarian Church here led the way to get the city be a sanctuary city. We were one of the first sanctuary cities in the country, and this is when people were fleeing Nicaragua to avoid being killed in all the fighting, and they were actually, it was like an underground railroad kind of thing. So that was, I mean, that was really impressive. So I think churches could help register folks to vote. I mean, what kind of city do we have if District 1 and 2 people vote, but District 3 people don't vote for whatever reason? I mean, some of them are undocumented, but a lot more undocumented don't vote. My district, District 4, doesn't vote. And nothing changes, even though people are unhappy with the structure, because the people who are friends with the people running everything still vote. You know, so I think churches have to lead the way. And I don't think, and it's hard because then you get upset, let's say, you know, the Calvary Church expands in Santa Fe and has 1,000 people to vote and they elect a school board where they're banning books. You know, we would not like that. At least I wouldn't. Maybe all of you would. But no, so it's complicated because conservative churches have every bit a right to get involved. So it's not just, you know, that everything's going to be liberal and progressive. I mean, they're trying now the next, so they've taken away reproductive rights. They're going to move on birth control. They're going to get rid of no-fault divorce. I don't know why, because so many of those top Republican legislators get divorced all the time. but they, that's one of the ways, and they're going to try to use the Equal Protection Clause. This is really fascinating. They're going to say a fetus is a person. And under the 14th Amendment, that person has equal rights. Therefore, anything you do to the fetus is a crime. And that's going to be through judicial fiat. They're not going to have to pass a national abortion ban. So those are kind of the things that they're working on behind the scenes. And what I think is that progressive and liberal churches that believe that you should keep your religious principles but maybe not inflict them on the person next door to you, those people have to get really, really involved in civic life. Because, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, if you're married, if you're a woman married to your love of your life who's female, or a man married to the love of your life who's male, that's going to go away. Hey, we had a question?
I was wondering if you have an opinion about the plaza.
What about the box?
Yeah. So the paper's opinion that was in the paper right after it happened was that they should clear everything away and let it sit for a while, and then something would emerge that we would know what to do. And evidently that was very expensive, I guess. But had they done that, there would be no block. And I still, that is actually my, not, everything I write is not always my personal opinion, because it's not my paper. You know, I'm not the owner of the paper, that's Robin's, and it should be her opinion. But that was one where that was something I said, what about this? Yeah. Going forward, I have no clue. Because the wounds here are very deep, because if you're a Hispanic New Mexican, you basically feel like that monument is to your relatives. Your great-great-grandpa who fought at Glorieta Pass, or it's something of your childhood because you used to cruise the plaza and there it was and you liked the way it looks. You know, you proposed to your girlfriend in front of it. And it means a lot to you. And nobody told you all those years that, wow, Indigenous people find this really offensive. And now you find out they did. It is offensive. And, well, if we take the plaque away, that'll be fine. And maybe that will be, I don't know. You know, they could rebuild it like at the Veterans Cemetery. I had a guide today that said put it at the National Guard Museum. And I don't have we haven't even come to start healing. And that gets back to the challenge of how do we become a nice city. And if you grew up here and you don't feel welcome in the heart of your town anymore, that's very, very painful. And there's a lot of people in town who feel that. And I always say that things in Santa Fe are never about what they're about. So if you go back to the International Museum of Folk Art, if you remember the fuss over the Guadalupe that was wearing roses, it wasn't really a bikini, but she looked naked. That was really, really offensive to religious Catholics. That doesn't mean religious Catholics should get to censor everything and say, you can't do this, you know, because the artist was a Chicana Catholic herself. But it does mean that someone should have understood that that was painful. They weren't just misogynistic, you know, like I told somebody during the whole thing, that would have made my grandma cry. And if you'd taken a sacred Kachina and dressed her up in a bikini, would they have allowed that? So, you know, I think we just have to be sensitive. I mean, I always thought the museum could have said, we're not going to censor, but let's put it in a public gallery that's not paid for by your tax dollars, and everyone can go see it, but we're listening to the people, you know. But I don't know if that would have served either. I always think there's compromises, and then when we suggest them, it turns out, no, there's not, and everyone wants to fight some more. And when you go back to that Indigenous Peoples Day, we had that whole summer of George Floyd. The mayor said, we'll take it down, we'll take them down. He couldn't, it turned out, the way he thought he could. And the activists involved have waited a long time. And they decided that talking wasn't going to solve it. And how, you know, so it was awful. I mean, if you don't like mob violence, it was awful. But did any of you guys cheer when the Robert E. Lee statue came down in Virginia? Yeah. So it's complicated. And that was a hard one for me personally, because if you live in Santa Fe a long time, if you live in New Mexico a long time, you know a ton of people. So one of the co-founders of the Three Sisters organizations is my niece and my goddaughter, and I love her dearly. And I was very worried after that happened because they were getting death threats. And the family encouraged her to go hide somewhere because we were afraid something was going to happen to her. And at the same time, one of my very, very best friends, her mother was Fiesta Queen. She loves the fiesta. She loves her heritage. I love my heritage. I have an ancestor that came with Oñate. You know, I wouldn't be here if they hadn't have come and then come back. But I also get that, you know, some of the Spanish protesters right now are saying, you know, the best thing that happened to the Indians is that we showed up. Well, no, that's not true. That's not true. And, you know, the Pueblo Revolt was horribly bloody and violent because the cruelty of the Spanish for 100 years was awful. So, and then if you're Hispanic, the Anglos came, and that was the other layer of colonialism. And the Pueblo, because of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, kept a lot of the land that they got to keep. I mean, obviously the Spanish screwed everything up, messed up the land that the Pueblos had. Like Taos Pueblo went all the way to Mora once upon a time. My father-in-law used to joke when my husband and I got married, because they're from Taos Pueblo, that now we're getting some of our land back because we lived in Mora. And obviously it doesn't go to Mora anymore. There's not nearly as many Pueblos as when the Spanish came. So they lost a lot. But because they had the revolt, they were able to keep their language, keep their culture, keep their religion in a way that many tribes across the country did not. And then you get the Anglos coming and you get them taking land, taking ranches. So Hispanic people, despite having stolen the land in the first place, have a grudge and a long one, and it's a memory. And I feel it too sometimes with people who've moved here and, you know, they like Santa Fe, but they want you to stay in your place. And there's a strong feeling of that. And hopefully most people aren't like that. But it seems like we used to get people who moved here who kind of acclimatized and liked it. And now we're getting people who move here who fence themselves off And that was honestly one of the things that my husband didn't like about Taos, is that he felt like it was becoming a gated place. And it wasn't, when he was a kid, everybody mixed together. And now it didn't feel like that. So he was very sad in a way. What do you guys think should be at the plaza?
Flowers.
Yeah.
Cornfield.
See, I thought if they emptied it, people would dance so much in the summer
Yes.
that they would just say, oh, this isn't bad. And I don't think that's possible now, but I think if they'd done it right away, it might have been. That was my hope.
Just something that doesn't obscure the stage when they have something.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just thought just
For
flag,
sure.
and some people had some really good ideas, like for putting a mosaic. So something pretty, so it would be flat, you could use it, but it would still be gorgeous. So, and 100 years, no, not 100, but more than that, the gazebo used to be in the middle. So if you've ever been to Old Town Las Vegas, our bandstand is in the middle. That was how Santa Fe was once upon a time.
Well, I think it should be again.
Yeah, see, that's a possibility, but I think people are paralyzed. And I don't know, it's kind of like if you remember the progress of the rail yard, it was going to be high-end hotels. People fought it back. Debbie Jaramillo got elected. They started the process to make the rail yard a community space. And they actually did it, and then it opened right during the real estate downturn in 2008. So it didn't progress as quickly or as wonderfully as we wanted it to. But now I think it's a pretty, it's a pretty nice space for us. And it took forever, but maybe it takes forever when you're actually going for a consensus, So that could be a plus, not a minus. Yeah. Yes,
I
ma'am.
just want to thank you for your editorials and your newspaper. It's wonderful. My dream in retirement was 2 cups of coffee in the morning and the evening.
Oh, I love that.
That's all I need.
Thank you. It is such a treat because we're having our 175th birthday this year.
Wow.
So we're really happy to still be here, to still be fairly robust. And considering the world of newspapers around the country, I think we have 60% fewer now than we did like 10 or 20 years ago. It's one of the dying careers. The fact that the New Mexican has been able to survive is because we have readers who subscribe, which we thank you for. We have businesses who advertise. Smart people a long time ago came up with the idea to have an arts magazine. So we have Pasatiempo. We have our special sections which go the year round and are full of information, advertising, pictures, and those things help support the main paper. We also are a printing plant if you ever need anything printed, because we print the New Mexican, the Reporter, the Albuquerque Journal, the New York Times, I think the Rio Grande Sun, the Daily Lobo. We print everything. And we'll keep doing that until print goes away, which I think someday it'll be gone, but I don't know. That's too smart for me to figure out. Yes, sir.
Any idea how many family-owned newspapers are left in America today?
That's a great question. Robin would know that. There's not many is the only answer I have. And not all of them are good, because you can have a good family like we do, and you can have a really evil, creepy family. The Baltimore Sun, which is one of the storied newspapers of this country, I think it's by the guy who owns the Sinclair TV stations. And he is a right-wing creep. And he's a person, owns a company, so he's bigger, obviously, than us. But he is going to tear that paper just like the TV stations are set to, issue right-wing propaganda. Harvey Yates, if you guys know his name, he is a very rich, might even be a billionaire. He's an oil guy in New Mexico, Republican. Not a crazy Republican, though, just like a conservative Republican. I think there's a difference, and there's still some of those left. But he bought the Rio Grande Sun when the Trapp family decided to sell it. That's a weekly in Española. And now I think he owns Alamogordo and one more. He owns like 3 papers. So that's another place where local papers are being owned. The Pat Davis, who's a Albuquerque City Council, started his own kind of alternative paper in Albuquerque. And I think he's bought a couple of others around it. So that's another person. So New Mexico's a really interesting place to have so many independent newspapers and actually functioning newspapers. But Las Cruces, which had a great newspaper, and I still think does a lot with what it has, only has like 3 reporters left. Because Gannett owns it, and they have just gutted it. And it's edited from El Paso. And it's not the same, and that's just a really fine newspaper. So if anybody's really rich, they could go buy that one. They deserve a good paper. Yes, sir.
Back in the day, you used to occasionally publish some things in Spanish, which I always enjoyed, because
Yes.
then I got to practice reading and so forth. So if you want to do that again.
I'll tell Robin.
Yeah.
I still have Larry Torres, so he goes back and forth, but yes. Yeah, one of my best coworkers at the New Mexican, Sandra Martinez, came and edited La Voz after Flood quit editing it. I don't know if you guys remember Flood Henley. So she was the editor of La Voz when it started, and it's been a tradition for, for God, decades and decades to have some Spanish. So you're right, that's a great point.
I've been learning Spanish with Canuto.
Oh, nice. Yes. I'll tell Larry, that's really good. Yeah, I always joke that, the trajectory of immigration is you get here, you don't speak English, your kids speak both, your grandkids don't speak any. Yeah. So it was a little longer, so my great-grandma didn't speak English, my grandma spoke both but liked Spanish, my mom spoke both but liked English, and I learned so little Spanish that it's embarrassing, and it's a real loss. So one of the great things to me about immigration in Santa Fe is when I came back in the 80s, it wasn't here, but when I came back in the 90s, there was so much Spanish everywhere, and I was like, that's how it was in Las Vegas when I was little. So I think that's a great plus. Yes, sir.
Well, one of the real problems with news today is how many silos it's been put into.
Yes.
That there's no crosstalk back and forth between them. And part of it's the Gannett world, people and people like them that have just gobbled everything up, and then Sinclair, and then have their own opinions that they give the reporters actually the script to read. On some of the television stations. Do you have any idea how we go forward from here to try to take the silos down? Or in other words, to have people with crosstalk back and forth and the independence to actually say what the news is?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think when we got rid of the fairness doctrine on TV, that really changed things for the worse. So at one time, they might have had a script, but they would have had to have a counter script. You couldn't have a Fox News that way, under that day. In print, it's easier because, like on our pages, I actually go out of my way to run Honoroo, Henry Olson. There's a couple of Washington Post columnists that are conservative, but I don't think are completely crazy, because I draw the line at that. We have 2 or 3 letter writers that are very conservative, and so you try to have a conversation, and you also try to focus on how do we solve this issue. So if you get away from I'm a Republican or you're a Democrat or I'm an independent, but you say we have homelessness, what can we do? And then you look at solutions. So I think the way in opinion stuff is to go toward what is a solution to this.
Right.
And not to always revert back to, Democrats just want to hand out money and buy votes or whatever. But news is hard. I mean, like Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, which thought, that was a great thing supposedly at the beginning. He invested, it grew. And then one of the weird things about Trump is that he sells papers, he gets clicks. And when they started losing money, they started bringing in all the British people to run the Washington Post. And they don't have the same kind of journalistic ethics we do. And I think, they buy sources, they hack phones, and I kind of think that's all going to explode in a way. But if, not like if Warren Buffett bought a paper and didn't expect to make profit, maybe that would help. So people like that. There's nonprofit news sources, ProPublica is a website where you can go read investigative reports. They're the ones who found out that Clarence Thomas was for sale, basically. In New Mexico, we have Source New Mexico, which is got really good reporting. They did particularly well on the Hermit's Peak fire, I think. New Mexico In Depth does great political stuff. Searchlight New Mexico, which our old editor Ray Rivera actually founded, and it's a website that does like in-depth reporting about things that the reporters think are interesting, so it's really fun to read. And we run some of their stories, so you've seen them in the paper. So you just have to read, but it's hard because things are siloed. You're absolutely right. So I have no great answer. I don't know. It's really depressing. I mean, just the debate got 50 million people, and I think more people watch Caitlin Clark play basketball at night than watch the debate. Yeah, there's no spitting that one, is there?
That's right. So, well, Inez, thank you so very much for being here. And thank you for the vision of what a paper needs to be and how it represents the wider community. And your whole notion, in answer to Rocky's question about divisiveness or whatever, is let's focus on the problem. And I'm right, you're wrong, but what are the options for dealing with a certain, whatever the problem might be, so.
No, the homelessness issue right now, I think is a perfect example because I think the people at Pete's will say, well, the way we do it isn't working.
Yeah.
They're not all defensive and like, we're perfect, this is great. They know it's not working, but they need help. Like, does anybody have a better site for them? Does anybody have, you know, more room, a place to have a day shelter? So you have to get to that. You can't just say, well, this is terrible, close it. You have to say, what can we do next and do better? And all the sides kind of agree now, so maybe we'll start making progress.
I hope so,
Yeah, you're right.
absolutely.
Anyway, thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for all the people